it didn't seem like Dale was a barrel full of black ink kind of guy. So how would he go try to get a point across he was trying to make?
That's why I think he was always a good friend of Bill Jr.'s, and he was a good friend of mine. But he would eat our lunch. But it's like racing against him on Sunday, and he'd move you out of the way. First guy to call you Monday morning was going to be him. He'd call Dale Jarrett. He'd call Rusty Wallace. He'd call Ricky. He'd call whoever, Darrell Waltrip even. Everybody that he had to move out of the way to win a race or get up there, he'd call him the next day and say, look, we make a living off this sport, kind of type thing. He'd do the same thing with us. He did our lunch a little bit during the broadcast when he knew he had his voice. But he would call us 6 o'clock on Monday morning. If my phone rang, it was either Bill Jr. or Dale Earnhardt. But he would go behind the scenes and say, look, this is what builds this sport. And he was right. Those types of things that he would do on the racetrack or would hold us accountable for publicly. He was right that those things are part of the sport growing, and that's why he was such a big impact on us as a league, but also us as a driver.
The change in the guard, I feel like Jeff Gordon was another guy who was like the baton from Dale handed to Jeff, more or less. So how would Jeff handle certain things that he was perturbed about?
In the same fashion, but so Dale was a good Southern gentleman with a Southern streak in him. Jeff was a good West Coast or Indianapolis type gentleman. So he might do it. He might do it differently, and you felt a little bit better when you walked away from Jeff. When sometimes Dale Sr. would walk away, and you felt like you just been beat up with a baseball bat or something. But Jeff and what gave both of them the ability to do that was their credentials. I mean, they weren't coming in there saying, "Look, this is all screwed up," because they wanted an advantage. They already had the advantage, and they say, "Look, this is not right for us to be able to do this and so not be able to do it," type thing.
I've heard an interview when Dale passed. There was a little bit of a time lapse there of a changing of the guard before you thought Jeff was ready. You had Rusty and Dale Jarrett and Terry Labonte kind of take that role and split it. But his dad always says it, like, Corey ain't going to listen to me, so I have somebody else tell him. Now, if there was a group of drivers that were kind of complaining about one thing and didn't see the full scope of it, instead of you being like having a town hall meeting, would you ever just go to Dale or Jeff and be like, can you explain this to these guys and get them back on your side?
Yes, and it'd be the other way too. They'd all go to Dale and then to Jeff and say, can you go to these guys and explain to it that they've got it messed up? So yes, there's always a senior driver in the garage area, and I've seen this over 3 generations, that you can go to and say, look, we're not going to make it make sense. Can you go help them understand it? And then, though, occasionally when a younger driver comes along, they say, the older drivers will say, look, we've tried, you go talk to them. So we kind of do it back and forth in those days.
Is there anybody that's surprising that we wouldn't think of? Like, we obviously think of the Dales, Jeff Gordon's, Rusty Wallace's. Is there somebody that was a little bit more quiet about it that we would be surprised that took that role that was a little bit more unassuming?
No, I think it was kind of obvious. Even when Senior was the guy that everybody would go to argue with us over stuff, there were other drivers that would have conversations with us, and obviously we'd pay attention to them because they were race car drivers, but they were successful race car drivers. Kyle Petty, Rusty Wallace, Dale Jarrett, Terry Labonte, and Bobby, Terry was ultra quiet about his whole career. So you'd almost have to call a Terry Labonte up and say, look, what is this? And then he would be, he'd be glad to tell you if you asked him about it. Matt Kenseth was kind of the same way. But there were all along, there was always all generations had drivers, more than just one. But the big voices was Dale Sr., and then there was a void, and then it became Jeff Gordon. A lot of people thought that Dale Jr., but Dale really didn't come to the hauler a lot about issues. He just said, tell me what I got to do and I'll go race. And Corey, Corey, like his dad would come up there and argue just to distract us, so his team was off doing something. Corey just comes up and said, "Hey, how you guys doing? What's going on? Anything I can do for you?"
I just generally like asking your opinion and see what's going on. Keep a pulse on.
Yeah, but you make. It's easy for me to say yes to you, whether it's a softball tournament or doing this, because you're sincerely just happy to be here.
Yeah. And I hope to remain that way through the course of my career and not forget that, right? Because I am happy to be here.